So now I would like to hand it over to Mr. Jonathan Sanders, who is the area manager at the National Parks and Wildlife Service of New South Wales. And he's going to talk about inspiring pride in the plain, in the Cumberland Plain in Western Sydney.
Thank you very much. This is a picture of Cumberland Plain woodland. The Cumberland Plain is where you're sitting. So it's a fertile area of soil surrounded by all the sandstone, all the World Heritage sandstone around Sydney. So because it's fertile, it took the first impacts of European settlement. This is a stand of Cumberland Plain woodland. There's only 9% of Cumberland Plain woodland left. Of that 9%, 8% is in reserves, so 0.7% of this critically endangered vegetation community is in reserve systems. It, like most of the Cumberland Plain, has been subject to logging, clearing, grazing and agriculture. So this stand is probably somewhere around about 40 years old at the very most. So I'm going to talk to you today, just give you a little bit of background, and then I'm going to give you 4 examples of the restoration sort of work that we're doing. There's going to be a little bit of scientific data, but I'm not going to linger on it. By all means have a quick look at it, but I'm not going to go into the detail of that because this talk is mainly about the concepts. Okay. So this is a much more typical picture of the Cumberland Plain and the sorts of reserves we get. Obviously, to repair something like this means you have to act in a whole range of different ways, so you have to address a whole range of problems. That's the title of the talk, and that's who I am. Right, so that's a map of what the Cumberland Plain vegetation looked like when Europeans, and that's what it looked like about 8 years ago. So the yellow stuff is Cumberland Plain woodland. You can see how little of it is left. We have 15 reserves, and they're all separated by a whole lot of landscape with lots of things happening in it. And obviously for those reserves to survive in a long time, we need to have conservation across the landscape, not just in the reserves. My largest reserve is 1,000 hectares. Now the Cumberland Plain is subject to ongoing development pressure. It's where most of Sydney's new houses are going. That's one of the new reserves that we're getting, and this is the suburb next to it. About 7,000 houses a year going in each year over the next few years. Okay, now there is reason to smile though, and that's because the vegetation of the Cumberland Plain is there because it's got through incredible amounts of damage and destruction in the way of fire and drought and flood. So the vegetation there survived 1 in 100,000 year droughts. So there is a fair amount of capacity for recovery from disturbance. And as an example, this is the ADI site. And that vegetation there is becoming one of our new reserves. That's what the ADI site looked like in the 1940s. So no restoration work done, but you can see that certainly the trees do come back. One of the other issues we have to deal with though is we have a whole bunch of weeds that are invading Western Sydney. Lots of people bring in lots of plants, think they're a wonderful thing, and then they escape. And a lot of those weeds are capable of transforming the ecology. So that is African olive, same place, about 10 years apart. And African olive is one of the weeds that will transform the ecology completely. So how do we address this? Well, this is my first example. First of all, to deal with African olive, we have to find some willing volunteers. This is a Skywell community group. They came to us and said, what can we do to help? And we said, well, we don't have a lot of African olive in Skywell National Park. And they said, well, let's get rid of it. So we knew already that if you cut African olive and then you painted the stumps, then we killed a fair part of it. But we probably got somewhere around 60 or 70% that were killed. However, we experimented a bit. We found that if you add a fire, and preferably the most intense fire you can get, then the death rate for the African olive was more like 99%. We also kill any seedlings we've missed. We also kill the seed bank. And the thing about that is that that's a relatively economic way to go about it, okay? And it also stimulates a lot of the native species to come back. So what we've done with that now is we've got a cooperative program happening with a range of other community-based conservation organisations, and we're now quantifying that in adaptive management trials for African olive, African lovegrass and lantana. Another major issue is we don't have hollows. We've got 93 species of fauna that use hollows. A lot of them are hollow dependent. That's a big stump, not a big tree, but that gives you an idea of the size of trees that used to be in the Cumberland Plain, and they're not there now. So we've mostly got less than 5 per hectare. There's about 6 old trees in the 1,000 hectares of Skyville National Park. And if you look at this data there, those 2 parks are actually the sandstone on the edge of the Cumberland Plain. So they've only had a really small amount of logging in them. So they're pretty much a reference point for what the rest of the reserves should be like. So what do we do about that? Well, you can wait for the hollows to come back, but that's going to take a very, very long time. It takes somewhere around 80 to 90 years for a eucalypt to start developing hollows, and the sorts of hollows you want are probably more like 120, 130 years away. So that's, whoops. There we go. That's the age structure of the trees. We're talking about trees somewhere around here to actually get hollows. So we're going to be waiting a long time. So what we can do is make artificial hollows. These are a range of back boxes, again developed with community help, and we had donations of timber from a hardware store and community members helping us to construct them. Range of designs, and yes, we do get bats in them. And as a bonus, we also got feather-tailed gliders moving in, which was something completely unexpected. And does it make a difference? Well, yes, it does. Measuring from echolocation and trapping, that's before the bat boxes went in, that's 6 months later. That's the activity, that's the area with bat boxes compared to the control, 18 months later. And that outcome is still happening. Those people who came on the tour of the Cumberland Plain on Sunday, Dr. Tanya Leary, who's doing all this work, trapped 95 bats overnight. Okay, so what are the next steps? Well, apart from the urban art installations like this is something we've done in an area where all the trees are gone, so we don't have anywhere to actually put the bat boxes, but we've got a project coming up where we will be working to actually get school kids to build bat boxes and put them up in their local neighbourhoods, also working with men's sheds associations and the local TAFEs, that's the technical colleges. Okay, next issue is lack of rocks. In the Cumberland Plain there are no rocks, so if you want to hide from a predator, or you want to hide from a fire, or you want to get out of the heat and stay cool, stay warm or stay cool, there's nowhere to go unless someone happens to have dumped a car there for you. Okay, and again, this gives you an idea of the numbers of logs. Those are pretty much the undisturbed areas. That's where the Cumberland Plain is. So they're very important. Mainly firewood collection has taken the logs away, and less than 5 per 100 metres, which is way below what we know is the minimum requirement. And most of those logs are very small. So what can we do about that? Well, what happens is things like bush rat. This is virtually the most common thing. Bush rats and antechinus, little marsupial mice, are the things that any student expects to find in any small mammal survey. Completely gone from the Cumberland Plain. However, there's signs that they're trying to come back. So what we did was we told this story to a bunch of community people, and this is the outcome. What actually happens here is we've got the Mulgoa Land Care Group, who then approached the Catchment Management Authority, Greater Sydney Local Land Services, and approached the developer. These are trees that were cut down as part of an improved development. Instead of shredding those trees in a wood chipper, the developer cleaned them up and provided them to us, and a helicopter operator donated time to put them into the nature reserve. So we have about 15 tonnes of logs put into this nature reserve. We've got another 2 programs happening as well. Developers are starting to go, wow, what a great place to put trees, and other people are putting them on their own property. Okay, Fourth problem is seed bank. We try and regenerate stuff. Trees come back, but it's actually the ground cover layer that's a real issue. But there are no seeds, and we can't really afford to do lots and lots of tube stock because that's far too costly. So you make your own seed bank. This is Dr. Paul Gibson-Roy from Greening Australia. We're working with Greening Australia and Murrumbidgee, who are an Aboriginal tribal corporation, to produce seeds. So these are all seed boxes, and essentially once the seeds come, you just whip a snip of the seeds off the top, and that's what you've got. Okay, but we need to actually do much better production than that. So this is seed production areas, and essentially when the seeds come, they fall down into here, and you can just vacuum them up. So then we look at actually trialling this. This is the first trial seed-based restoration at the University of Western Sydney, and this is the first half a hectare that we're sowing in Wainumanna Nature Reserve. Around 60 species of seeds of native plants being sown into this, whereas the normal standard in past years would have been probably about 5 to 10. And again, it's important to have community outreach. This is students from Wilmot Public School who have a small area of Cumberland Plain woodland, and they agreed that it was a great idea to actually do seed-based restoration in their playground area in this Cumberland Plain woodland, and that area will now become a seed production area. And as part of that, they did a whole lot of other activities, learning activities about the Cumberland Plain, including producing this beautiful book of artworks and stories. There's a high proportion of Indigenous children in the school, and also putting on a major concert about the Cumberland Plain. Okay, so what do we learn about that? Well, obviously science is important, and this is the Cumberland Restoration Advisory Panel, who are a bunch of scientific people providing input into the stuff we're doing. But it's even more important to have the community involved, because in this landscape we absolutely need community support. Adaptive management is absolutely vital, so we've got to think about solutions and try them out. We've got to cut the problems into bite-sized chunks. If someone said you've got to eat a bullock, well then how are you going to do that? You're going to do it a mouthful at a time. So that's the same way. Okay, you've got to give the community right involved from the very beginning, because they've got to see tangible successes. And the stories are very important. The scientific papers are great, but the stories are really, really important, because that's what's going to be retold. So starting small, but looking at methods that can be scaled up. So we've got to watch what we get in our minds about preconceptions. That looks like a concrete tank to me. To a platypus, that looked like a beautiful piece of habitat that he wanted to move into. So we had to rescue a platypus from there, but he was quite happy. So you've got to not let the condition of the landscape fool you into thinking that it's second rate or doesn't appeal to the wildlife. We're surrounded by World Heritage Area, so it's very, very easy to think, oh, look, this isn't really worth much. The landscapes have been there for millennia, millions of years, and they've recovered from incredible sorts of damage. So you need to give them the credit for being able to come back and figure out how to assist. And the other thing is, it's really important not to make value judgments about what's good habitat. You and I might want to live in a mansion with a big swimming pool and so on, but there's a lot of creatures that are more than happy to live in a caravan park. So if you provide the right things, they'll give it a really good go. And once the community understands this and understands their capacity to make a difference, then you build some real momentum. This is a koala from the World Heritage Area up on the Blue Mountains, but like a lot of other koalas, he's moving into the Cumberland Plain because the more fertile soils, the leaves taste better. Now to you and me that looks like a toilet, to an echidna that looks like a fantastic place to hide from a predator. And it was a great place to hide from a predator. So again, you've got to not make value judgments about what's good and what's bad based upon our perfectionism. Okay, so our great-grandfathers were the last people to see the Cumberland Plain in all its glory. And if we put in the work and imagination, our great-great-grandchildren will also get to see it.